preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
This evening's program with Vladimir Kagan, Chris Lehrecke, and Brooke Stoddard marks the final event in this year's this year's Dialogues with Design Legends series. Artist Visions happens in the spring. Dialogues with Design Legends was conceived of and curated by Christina Grajales, and we are eternally grateful for her bringing this incredible series to the 92nd Street Y. The moderator for this evening's program is Brooke Stoddard. Ms. Stoddard began her professional career as an editorial assistant at Harper's Bazaar. She moved quickly through the ranks, and by the time she left Harper's 4 years later, she had been promoted to associate design editor. Ms. Stoddard is currently, for the past 5 years, has been at House and Gardens, where she is currently style editor. One of the columns that she works on, and I just love this, is called Hunting and Gathering, a title which clearly has different associations for the reader of House and Garden than it does for the Bushman of the Kalahari. A frequent speaker on style and design, Ms. Stoddard has spoken recently at the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum and the International Contemporary Furniture Fair, as well as regular appearances on television and radio. Today, as we were speaking about this evening, Ms. Stoddard said, and I quote, "I feel truly fortunate to have the opportunity to meet the creators of our time, to hear in their own words what excites and interests them, and in my mind, that makes her eminently qualified to be moderator for this evening's panel." The evening will go as follows. Ms. Stoddard will come out, provide an introduction to Mr. Kagan. Mr. Kagan will then show slides of his work. Ms. Stoddard will then do an introduction for Chris Lehrecke, and he will then show slides of his work. There will then be an informal discussion about their work and ideas. And at the end, there will be an opportunity for you to pose questions. As always, we invite you to pose questions, but we also ask that if you have something, that it be brief, concise, to the point, and we look forward to whatever input you have. With no further ado, thank you again for joining us, and please help me to welcome Brooke Stoddard.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Robert, very much for that introduction. I'd like to also thank everybody at the Y, and especially Christina Grajales, for putting this incredible series together, and to thank my guests this evening, Mr. Vladimir Kagan and Chris Lehrecke, for joining me. Thank you. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. Kagan. Vladimir Kagan enjoys the rare distinction of being a designer who's been shaping the landscape of furniture design for the last 50 years. His own distinctive style of curvaceous, sensuous forms, born from a love of sculpture, have created award-winning pieces that are now housed in permanent collections in museums worldwide. Such museums as the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Cooper Hewitt, the Vitra Museum, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, as well as our own Metropolitan Museum of Art here in New York. He has literally changed the way we think of sitting in a sofa or on a chair, and shaped how furniture operates in a given space. Kagan was born in 1927 in a place called Worms, Germany, on the Rhine. He is the son of a master cabinet maker. His father, Eli Kagan, whose woodworking shop is where Kagan learned how to make a piece of furniture from the ground up. Kagan moved to the US in 1938. His design career is marked by an early passion for painting and sculpture, and a formal education in architecture that he received here at Columbia University in New York. In the late 40s, Kagan opened up shop in New York, first with his boutique on East 65th Street, and then he quickly, in 1950, moved to the fashionable 57th Street. It is there where the worlds of design and art would merge, with a private client list that included luminaries such as Gary Cooper and Marilyn Monroe. Early commissions also included the design for the Delicate's cocktail lounges for the first United Nations headquarters in Lake Success, New York, as well as work for corporate clients such as General Electric, Walt Disney, and Prudential Insurance. A brief walk through the 5 decades of his designs could perhaps be categorized by a mark in different styles. In the 50s, his work focused on amorphous forms and highly sculpted, upholstered pieces. Then came the 60s and 70s. This period was marked by a opposing force of linear, architecturally inspired, minimal pieces, inspired by the likes of Mies van der Rohe, Le Corbusier, as well as the Bauhaus. In the 1980s, monolithic modernism fell away to the postmodern movement, and Kagan explored with neoclassical references in his work as an extension of his own modern style. The 1990s brought about a bold expression of forms inspired directly by the work of deconstructionist architects like Zaha Hadid and Frank Gehry. Kagan has furniture collections produced by leading manufacturers all over the world, including Directional, American Leather, Fossem, Preview Furniture Company, and Clubhouse Italia. His career has included a 30-year retrospective, Vladimir Kagan, 3 Decades of Design, at the Fashion Institute of Technology in 1980. More recently, in the spring of 2000, he was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award of the American Society of Furniture Designers. And in May of 2001, he received an honorary Doctor of Arts degree from Kendall College of Art and Design. Kagan's innovative furniture designs were often so ahead of their time that they have never gone out of fashion. In fact, the renewed interest in his work resulted in the birth of a collection called the Vladimir Kagan Classic Collection. What a luxury to reinvent yourself in your own career. And then later, there was a launch of this collection included, reissues of pieces dating from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. In January of 2001, Kagan introduced the Kagan New York collection at the Cologne Furniture Fair. And speaking of fashion, Kagan's current projects include designs for Gucci boutiques worldwide, in collaboration with William Sofield, as well as the design for the lobby of the ultra-hip Standard Hotel in Los Angeles, California. But perhaps the best way to cast Kagan's contribution to design and his far-reaching influence on a new generation of designers, contemporary designers today, is best put in his own words. Quote, "I have been modern for over 50 years. Kagan lives here in New York in Nantucket with his wife, Erica Wilson, an internationally renowned needlepoint designer. He is an active member of the design community, and his latest concoction includes the design for Bombay Gin of their new martini glass. With that, I welcome Vladimir Kagan.
That is such an introduction, I really can't add much to it. I think I'll just show you pictures, and I want to make sure that Erica has turned off my telephone. Bravo. So I'm going to take you through a very quick 50-year span of my designs, and you will see by the, I was appalled a few moments ago how dirty my slides are. It gives you some kind of vintage to them. And this is me. You won't recognize me, but this is really my first and most successful chair, the barrel chair, and it's still in production today after over 50 years. I designed this in 1947, just after graduating from high school. And perhaps this is my most significant signature piece, very much the sculptural designs for which I became famous in the 50s and which are much thought of after today. And these are some of the early interiors. I was very keen on making furniture that you wouldn't sit in straight lines. Things were curved, My early influences were looking at nature, and this is one of the apartments, which still exists today. I did this in 1953. It has been sold 3 times, but the furniture has always remained there. An apartment, a house in Lausanne, Switzerland, belonging to an art collector. And this gives you a rather wonderful melange of all of my designs from that period. The very sculptural seating, the barrel chairs, the reclining chair. It's still the same house. And it's a virtually a museum of my furniture today. And this was the sofa that again was originally designed in 1949, but it's been in my collection ever since. And it really was the idea that I was very much influenced by the philosophy of Bauhaus, not Bauhaus lines so much, but the concept of less is more. And I took that to mean less furniture gives you more space. And by making large sofas like this, you could seat 8 to 10 people on it without having a clutter of furniture. So I developed a whole collection of designs based on that. I also wanted to liberate the walls, and in this case, you don't see any artwork, but many of my clients had major art collections, so the furniture had to move into the middle of the room in order to make space around the wall. During the time when I had my showroom, one of my mottos was, one piece by Vladimir Kagan is worth a room full of anything else. And so there's your example. They only bought one piece of furniture. This is an interior which we did originally in Long Island and has since been moved down to Florida, but still completely intact. It kind of gives you the feeling again of this flowing seating group. The light fixtures is mine also. I worked with light. The cabinet behind the sofa is a speaker unit and also had lighting in it. And this is the same sofa as we manufacture today in Italy. And it's called the Serpentine sofa, and it's doing extremely well in Europe and all over the world, as a matter of fact. This is a house on Martha's Vineyard. And I looked at the exterior and kept the colors all very muted to go with the fieldstone and the beautiful views out of doors. You can't really see the view here, but it's a lovely vista of vineyard sound and so on. And this is called the Swan sofa. The sculptured designs of mine were inspired by nature, by the growth of trees, and this is very much like a root of a tree coming up to support the leaves. And again, this is a piece of furniture that has stayed in my collection for over 50 years. This was inspired really by Brancusi's Bird in Flight at the Museum of Modern Art. I thought I wanted to use metal and make my wooden lines even slimmer. And by using bronze, I was able to make a very attenuated, slim design. And again, I went to metal, to casting, because I could make the elements slimmer, more elegant. And I never believed in having legs just popping out of a piece of furniture. I wanted them to become a part of the growth pattern. So the legs kind of support the contour seating, and the seats were very much designed. I mean, there again, form follows function. To me, meant it had to be very comfortable. And my furniture always has been comfortable. Is this in focus? I'm not sure it's... Maybe it's an out of focus. Anyhow, this is the original chaise lounge, which give you a time frame. It's about 1958. And all the pieces we've been looking at were 50 so far. And this piece had 3 legs, which has a fatal fault. If you're a little bit drunk and sit at the edge, you tip. So when I took this chair and made it commercial, I added a 4th leg to it. And so this is my chair that's being manufactured in Italy, and it's getting a lot of publicity and attention now. But I've changed it also slightly because I had things much lower to the ground, and somehow we've grown taller. I haven't grown taller, I've shrunk, but my clients have grown taller, so I've made the seats a lot higher. And so this is a little more comfortable seating height. I also played with metal in the 50s, and I had a collection called Capricorn. And this was one of the chairs. There were about 50 pieces in that group. There was an indoor-outdoor line. And then I did the same contours in stainless steel. And this is a reclining chair, and you can, I think I took the other photo out of it, but the whole chair rotates or rocks within a cradle. And this is again about 1955. Here we have the unicorn chairs, which were, the bases were inspired the same way as you saw in the table, the end table before, in the bronze table. And this was an interesting client, a house in Kings Point with 3 focuses. One was the magnificent view of Long Island Sound, the big fireplace that you see here, and in the third direction, they had 2 full grand pianos. So the client said, well, how can you design furniture, or how can you do the interior of this room for me? And I thought, well, the ideal thing would be to make one room setting that could be revolved. So what you're looking at is a big rotating carpet and that can be focused in any direction that my client wanted to use it. And it was usually quite magical because they would watch the sunset in the evening, go for dinner, and when they came back after the dinner, the whole living room section had been revolved to look at the concert pianos. There's the view looking out towards the Long Island Sound. Again, very sculptural. More is less, large pieces that you could seat a lot of people, but it had a very uncluttered room. This was a client that came to me. I don't know if you, the first projection television sets were developed, I think they were called Avanti or something like that, Advent. And you can see the 3 circles there. Oops, I even have my pointer. My God, I can be very, very chic. Here, these are the projectors, and you had to stay very much close to the guns, the 3 projectors, in order to keep the images focused. So I designed a 3-level seating group, 1 level, 2 level, and then a 3rd level. So this way you had an amphitheater effect. So it's one thing to draw it, it's another thing to make it. And this was the construction in my factory at the time of all the components, which are fairly hard to identify here, but this is the finished product. Here's the projector. This was the husband and wife's chaise, and then the various layers for sitting. We did this in ultra suede, which was at that time, of course, a very, very new material. And then I started to move away from the sculptural. I worked my sculptural periods in the early 50s into the 60s, and then started to look at architectural elements. And this is my infinity table in stainless steel, which is rather minimalist. The glass top extension dining table. These leaves really come out. And what you're looking at now is a table that is 10 foot long on a single pedestal. And from that, somebody said, can you make a desk for me like that? And so I developed this desk. And again, I apologize for the dust in the slides. It's horrible. These are the Limbus collection. This is again part of the 60s. These are all 60s designs, and into the 70s. And this is one of the tables that we're now reproducing in Italy and marketing both in the States and in Europe. very, very cubistic in my shapes, but I wanted to counterpoint this rather nice structure, almost oriental in feeling, with this very soft, plushy upholstery. So you had both comfort and linear design. And the 60s also was the beginning of plexiglass or lucite in furniture. And I wanted to use the lucite to lighten up the design, to make it float. And so you're really looking at the same seating concept in the lucite frame and the lucite coffee table. And these were the cubist chairs. These were designed to go with the glass top dining table that you saw earlier. Excuse me, this is a chair version, bar chair version. And Armani saw this, and Gabellini, his architect, saw these chairs and said, we have to use those for the Armani restaurant in Milan. So this is the new Nobu restaurant with all of my furniture in there. Excuse me. Then also in the late 60s, I came up with the idea of an omnibus seating collection, which meant elements, sectional elements that could be assembled in many variations, giving you multi-level seating and significantly moving it all away from the walls. There was no furniture against the walls. And excuse me, this is one of the interiors. I think I'll drink a little water. Thank you. I wish this was a martini, but this will have to do for the moment. There you see the way that concept lived free in the space, multi-level. Another house seen from the second floor, again the free-floating omnibus groupings. This is the new version of it as we made it in Italy. This was my show in Cologne. And then we moved from the 70s into the 80s, where I started to look at stylistic changes. Postmodern, basically. And this was rather much looking at deco as an inspiration. These chairs were pure deco designs, and I designed those for an apartment or penthouse in the Essex House. And when I went up to see the apartment, I noticed the chimneys had this castellation to it. And so I designed all of the furniture to reflect the Essex House Art Deco motifs. And then we did some more neoclassic designs with columns. This was a rather short-lived period for me. It helped me break away from the linear modern, but it also was a design element that I couldn't really fall in love with as something that I wanted to do forever. And so I moved on. And this is in our kitchen, a prototype of a chair that I made in the 80s. This was made in lead. Oopsie. Oopsie, let's go back one step further. That one isn't coming down, that's too bad. Well, there was an interim version of this chair which we made in wood. It was really designed for the Italian furniture manufacturing organization called Promesadia. And I thought it would be great to make a bent plywood chair, because I thought the Italians had great ability to do that. In actual fact, they never manufactured it in plywood. And then I found a manufacturer who would do it for me in steel. So this is the chair as we made it. And this is the end product. And that's in beautiful saddle leather, hand sewn, and chromed steel. This is a sofa that I call .com. And this is a late 90s piece, what we're looking at. And let me put my water down so I can use my pointer. this piece is the dot, goes into here, and of course the whole shape is sort of a comma shape. And the idea of it is a multi-level seating piece. And it's really a hip piece of furniture, fits into a loft or into a small apartment, and makes it for really casual lifestyle living. This was my exhibit at the Craft Museum, and I used the same sofa here in a new coloration. And it also shows some of the pieces which you'll see in a few moments that were inspired by Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. And when I looked at the architecture of the Bilbao museums, this was sort of a design element that came out of it. This chair is probably my most popular chair. It's called the corkscrew chair, or the Nautilus in Europe. The reason I know it's my most popular chair, it was knocked off by 8 manufacturers in America and dozens of them in Europe. But it's a wonderful chair and very comfortable. This was the Marilyn chaise, and this is where sort of the deconstructionist concept came in. There are no legs to it. It just sort of grows out of the floor, and it's very tough. Furniture design, you have to be realistic. You cannot be pure sculpture. It has to function to sit in, to lie in, and so on. So this is my deconstructionist thing. These are also elements of deconstructionism. This is a little group that I called the Baby Grand Piano. Again, a little free-sitting sofa. But from this, we developed the Bilbao. And this has been a very popular sofa collection of mine. That's made by Preview Furniture in High Point. And there you can see the sofa with the tables, again inspired by the museum architecture. Back to back. This is a little swivel chair, a chaise that swivels. And this is our apartment. This gives you an idea. We have this omnibus sofa, Frank Stella painting behind it, and it kind of indicates how we live at home. This is my darling Erica. And to show you that I'm not totally addicted to modern, this is my car in Nantucket. And with this, I hand it back to Brooke. Thank you.
On to Chris. Chris Lehrecke's furniture designs are distinguished by his rare dedication to craftsmanship and his passion for the sheer beauty of materials. He creates forms that are seemingly simple, yet all the elements and details are harmoniously blended to exacting requirements, and the result is sublime. In his work, it is the restraint, the confidence of the purity of the materials themselves, coupled with his unique vision of how they come together, that is startling and beautiful. As Ralph Pucci of Pucci Gallery states, quote, "I was immediately attracted to his classic sculptural pedestals. To me, he is a modern-day Brancusi, whose work has created his own modern language with footnotes to the past. One thinks of the work of Wegener, Noguchi, and Eames. These pedestals constituted a focal point of a collection for Pucci later on. At a time in the early 1980s, when other local New York designers were busy experimenting with alternative materials and provocative designs, Lehrecke's work whispered quieter notes as he was experimenting with materials found in nature, like wood. Lehrecke has made a career in furniture design without ever designing for other companies or creating large-scale production. A native of New York, he returned to New York after graduating from Colorado College with a BA in studio art and worked with a local cabinet maker, learning his craft firsthand. He soon opened his own woodworking shop in Manhattan, creating handcrafted pieces for private commissions both for designers and architects. In 1987, he opened his workshop and studio in Brooklyn, where he concentrated then on creating his own line of limited edition and made-to-order furniture. In 1997, he was awarded the Brooklyn Museum of Art Modernism Young Designer Award. In the very same year as one of Lehrecke's design heroes, Charlotte Perriand, was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award. In the last 5 years, Lehrecke has created 5 separate furniture and lighting collections for Pucci. They've included stainless steel tables, wooden and steel lamps, as well as a collection of upholstered chairs and sofas. Lehrecke points to the work of masters like Jean Prouvé and Alvar Aalto, but perhaps the largest influence in his life and work is nature itself. When asked what prompted his move from his Brooklyn studio to his upstate home, which is actually a church built in 1820 that he shares with his wife, jewelry designer Gabriella Kiss, and their 2 sons, August and Jack, he simply stated, "There are more trees there." And with that, I give you Chris Lehrecke.
They are actually martinis. Okay, so let's see. Thank you. It was a very nice introduction. I'm going to go right to the slides as well. Let me begin. This is not necessarily, it's somewhat chronological, but it's also, the slideshow will represent a lot of my influences and how I work. I guess this is a fairly early piece. At a time in the 80s where I was starting out and had very little money and a lot of time on my hands. And so I was trying to, I had some very simple ideas about what I wanted to be doing, and I started with these shapes and what materials I had in my studio at the time. When this table here is made out of fiberboard, which is some industrial cabinet material used for painting furniture and things like that. But I'll go to the next slide because it will show some of the influences. At around the same time, I stumbled upon a show of Tapio Virkala's sculptures at the IBM Gallery in some maybe 1987, and his work became an immediate influence on the way I looked at things, and this idea that with very simple materials you could make these beautiful things. Anyway, let me keep going. I kept pushing, these ideas. The idea of lamination, which Virkala, did so well, for me was a way of really just getting shapes made. You could laminate lots of pieces together in the shapes that you wanted and create these fairly complex shapes, and with very, very little to start with. And for me, it was a very sculptural way of building on these early pieces. This is a sculpture of a bird, obviously, but what I liked about this, it's a very small sculpture. This is a guy named Tim Hawkinson, and he collected his fingernails for about a year. And just that idea that you can make something as beautiful and articulate as this just out of your fingernails. This was later on, this was about 5 years ago. I came across this, but it's still one of those very inspirational pieces. It's not really in focus. This is again a continuation of some of these materials from Finland that I was becoming familiar with. This is a material that originally was designed for pouring concrete forms, but somebody started making it in different colors around this time, and I just thought it was a perfect material for making cabinetry out of, so I designed some lines of cabinets out of it as well. This also was happening around the same time. My obvious love of wood started coming out, and I had a background already in making things out of wood, and started just wanting to make very simple shapes. I think obviously at this point I was very influenced by African stools in particular. This is one of my early role models. And a friend of mine had a business of selling stools, and when he would bring in shipments, he would sell me the broken ones for very little, and or give them to me, and I would fix them up. But I just began to, fall in love with African stools and furniture in general. This is a picture of my studio at the time. I guess why I'm showing this is that although the influences were really African at that point, and the stools collection in particular, I had access to and knowledge of a lot of modern technology and processes that weren't available to the African stool. So it was around this time that my wife, Gabriella, who is a jewelry designer, showed me how to fabricate these metal fittings and how to silver solder, and she bought me an oxyacetylene tank for Christmas. So I was able to make these things that they were in my head, and I just needed to come up with a simple way of taking a slab of wood and attaching legs to it. And here was this is probably one of the earliest pieces, but again, from that same concept with the metal and the wood. When you see it, and when you see a lot of my work, it looks like it's all wood, but the metal is such an important part of it. It's the structural part. And I think what other influences I had in these early pieces were shaker design, and some very uniquely American influence as well. So there's this combination of things going on in these. It's also about this same time that I started experimenting with these pedestals and just taking these very simple shapes and working with a childhood friend of mine who was a master bowl turner who I became reacquainted with, and we started putting this collection together. And it's just so simple, but they're not that easy to make. The machine that can turn a 500-pound piece of wood, and the lunatic who has to hand turn each one of these makes this whole collection work. And I'm very indebted to him. His name is Jimmy DiCrescenzo. Here's another obvious influence of mine. This is a shot of Brancusi's studio, and all the great things in there. Actually, a friend of mine just came back from Romania, which is where Brancusi's from, and I just assumed that so much of his work was influenced by what was going on in African influences in art at the time. But in fact, there's a long tradition, totemic tradition in Romanian architecture, which I was not aware of until recently. But his work is just amazing. Here's a detail of one of the pedestals, and it just shows, what happens to these things when they come off the machine. They're like marble. We turn them wet, so we don't have to deal with any of the cracks as we're making them. We can control the shapes much better. But after that, it's really up to nature to let it do what it's going to do. And each one is different. Even after making as many as we have, they're still fun to make. Here's a picture of, I guess what's happened in the meantime is I've moved to the country, and it's the church in the background, and I'm now in a position to, just really control the materials much better than I had when I had my studio in Brooklyn. This was difficult to do in Brooklyn. But the materials are, the designs are so simple, so the materials have to be pushed as far as I can, so having it right there in your backyard really helps. And here's a picture from the studio where, where I'm able to warehouse the tabletop material and whatever we're going to be using for the pieces. And just, well, that doesn't look, well, maybe I'm looking at it at an angle. Another design from that period with, where the wood is very important, the design is so simple, and, having control of the few details that there are is very important. Here's another collection I presented to Pucci a few years ago, where it was sort of the inverse of the pedestals. I left the outside of the tree alone, and then tried to just create this one perfect cavity, very, very similar to something that Noguchi would do in terms of trying to combine that control and lack of control with nature. This is a picture of one of the main room in the church. I just wanted to sort of show an idea of the way I live and collect, and the way it influences the way I design things, and how important the whole thing is working together, and not just having individual pieces sticking out and not connecting with other things. But moving into this space was interesting. It's from 1820, but it's a very modern feeling space, and actually I think the modern furniture looks really good in this space. And this is another view of that same room, and trying to add color. This is that same piece, but in the Pucci showroom. Just trying to work with color a little bit, and similar shapes, but applying them to upholstery. This is a picture of one of the wide plank tables. I just wanted to, have a picture with a number of different chairs. I mean, this is the way it is, and I think what's for me important is that it works well with 7 or 8 different types of chairs, from a tonne chair from the turn of the century to Chinese to plycraft to George Nelson. And again, I'll go back to this one for the lighting, which was something something I've also been working on quite a bit the last few years, and again with wood, the idea of how light goes through different kinds of woods, and mostly local woods. I'm working with ash, maple, cherry, walnut, white oak, mostly woods that just come from the area that I live. And here's the first collection of lighting I did for Pucci. Again, a pretty good variety of the different shapes and sizes. Same idea, just done over and over again. Here's a little area of where I live, where I work, and I'm showing this picture again just for the way I collect and am influenced by things that I find or collect. And this table was a base that I found in an old metal shop that I had bought up the machinery from, and cleaned it up, and I put this beautiful piece of rosewood on it, and it just, I thought it was the most simple, basic, it's an old, I'd seen pieces like this from the turn of the century or a little later. It was just a really good version, and it just is such a simple idea, and it, very elegant, and inspired me to do a line of furniture around this concept, but with access to things like laser cutting and just lathes and machinery that wasn't available at the time. Here's a picnic table and bench that made out of yellow birch that did for Pucci, and a day bed, same concept. I guess I wanted to show that wood does represent a big part of it, but I'm working a little more in metal now than before. Although these pieces, could have been done, any of them could have been done at any time. The influences and the style has really changed very little from the beginning, but there's been a little bit of an evolution. And this is just something somebody found in the woods and gave to me. I just identified with it. And I think that's it. All right. Thank you.
We have a few questions that I'm going to bounce around because I'm dying to ask them.
You have to put your microphone
Oh.
on.
Yeah.
How's that? Is that good?
Much better.
Are we geared and ready to go? Yeah, okay. We have a few questions that I'm going to ask up on stage, and then we'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. So while we're talking, perhaps you can think of some things that you yourself might want to ask, that you have the opportunity. One thing that occurs to me, there's some commonalities in the experiences and work of both Chris and Vladimir, and one thing that instantly struck me was that they both share an experience of making furniture with hands-on training in woodworking studios and working with cabinet makers. And this is often, I find, a rare distinction among contemporary designers today. A lot of designers I know don't know how to make a piece of furniture. They sketch them or use the computer, but they actually haven't had that experience. And how would you describe your experience with that and how that's affected your work, both of you?
Well, I think
What importance
having hands-on, I worked in my father's cabinet shop, started off cleaning the machines and oiling the brackets and so on. And I worked with beautiful cabinet makers and craftsmen, and so I had the great pleasure of, when I had a creative idea, I could take it right into the factory, and it became a laboratory to create something. The trouble was, my father had always a motto: measure 3 times, cut once. And I cut 3 times measured once. And so I became a furniture designer instead of a cabinet maker.
And you, Chris?
Well, it's obviously very important to what I do. I mean, first of all, I just love making things, so that part makes it easy to go into the studio every day, which I still do. But for me, it was just a way of controlling. If you have an idea, and the best way of actually seeing it made the way you wanted to. So that's how it began.
And I would imagine, too, in your work, especially important to get a sensibility of the different characteristics of material.
That's the other thing.
Yeah.
It's just you see how materials react and what they do well and what they don't do well, and if the piece works or doesn't work, you see it immediately, not when it's too late. So that part works works very well for me that way. Great.
And both of you design collections and collections of furniture. And so I have to ask, I'm going to ask Vladimir first, how do you come up with your designs for collections, simply?
Well, I wear several hats. When I first started to design furniture, I really was inspired by the needs of my clients. And all of my new designs came about because somebody needed it. Like they wanted to have a glass top dining table that could extend, but I never thought I could make one, but I came up with a design. Then I had clients that had major art collections. They had Jackson Pollocks and God knows what, and we needed to have the wall space released. So I came up with the concept of omnibus, moving the furniture away from the wall, focusing the seating to look out. Now when it comes to designing lines, when you're starting to work for manufacturers, you start to work in a vacuum. And it becomes, you have to design 4 chairs, 3 sofas, and you have nobody to inspire you. But so I start doodling, and I call it my Dead Sea Scrolls. I have, as a matter of fact, I just came back on the plane today. I must have done 10 feet of drawings on the airplane.
Great.
But I just start doodling, and I go from one idea to the other, and I try to have no mental blocks and experiment with anything that comes to mind, try to put it on paper, commit it to paper, and then I start to refine it. But the bottom line is you have to have a market for it, and if you're designing industrially, as I'm doing so much of my designs now, many things influence it. Is it practical to make? Is it cost effective? Is that curve justifiable? Can they do it on the computer? A whole new range of new vocabulary come into play when you're designing collections.
And Chris, how?
Well, there are a lot of different ways. But I mean, the first is like Vladimir said, that with restrictions, that's a great impetus for designing. It has to fit in an elevator, has to cost a certain amount of money, it has to, function as something. So that a lot of pieces just come out of those very specific tasks. But there are other lines of furniture that come out of a machine or a craftsman or a material that I've become aware of, or like the pedestals, becoming reacquainted with this person that I knew, many years before, and finding out that he was this, master turner, this amazing mechanic, and he was willing to work with me to figure out how to put together this very simple idea, but it took quite a lot of work.
So that relationship gave birth to the collection.
Yeah, I mean, the ideas had been in my head, but hadn't really gone anywhere until you come across something like that. So a lot of times it's out of your control. And then they're just collections that, a material or something I've never done before. I just wanted, like lighting. I wanted to just try something new. So
Actually, I wanted to ask you about your lighting because it's so unique in the sense, and you mentioned in your presentation the gift from your wife, who's a jewelry designer, Gabriella. To me, the lighting has a real sensibility about jewelry, about the way the fixtures come together. And explain a little bit about how they're made, because I think people might not understand. It's a different way of creating lighting.
It is, but it's similar to the way I do everything. I don't really know what I'm doing when I start. And I just went out and bought all these different lamp parts. And I went down, there's this great old lamp store on Grand Street that I just bought everything, and I started putting things together and just throwing them out one by one until I was left with just the cord and the socket. And again, it was so simple. It had every fitting and every part had to be made properly, and I wanted it to look familiar, but I wanted it to look unique too. And again, and a tool came into the picture at the same thing. A lathe, an old lathe from 1946 came into the shop. I had found and suddenly, started thinking about what could I do with that machine. And so it was a combination of things. But I think for me, it's really been an asset to have no formal training and have no real baggage to have a lot of preconceived notions about design.
Because I think,
anyway.
Yeah, no, and your lighting especially, forgive me, I think it's a great example of how those things come together. You're pointing to the table with the metal around the top of the legs, and how it goes with all the different chairs from many different styles, and it sort of transcends style, but there's that notion of how those materials come together that's equally as important as the expression of the material, of the form itself.
Right.
So the lighting is a nice example of that.
Thanks.
That's great. I wanted to ask Vladimir, you studied architecture. And yes, you did. I know this about you. How do you think that has affected your work?
Well, it gave me discipline. It gave me references. It taught me a lot about structure. Because my first influences were looking at trees. I used to go out and draw trees all the time and flowers. And that taught me about growth patterns. And I loved anatomy, and I did a lot of anatomical drawings. And that kind of gave me the sense of the human body as the thing that I have to design for. But the architecture gave me another discipline of construction, of how negative spaces go together. It gave me kind of a yin and yang approach to my design, which has permeated all the way through over the last 50 years. Some of my stuff, even early on, was very linear, and some of my things today are very curvaceous and going right back to the organic and amorphous shapes.
And I'm tempted to say, too, in some pieces it seems that it operates as interior architecture in the space. I mean, you were pointing earlier to a wonderful project where it was all designed around the view and the idea of rotating on the carpet so that the client could see at a different view. So that one singular shape almost creates an interior architecture of sorts.
It does,
in the furniture.
and I've always had a conflict with architects, that architects tend to build monuments to themselves and for their clients, and they are working from the outside and don't really worry too much about how the interior gets broken up. And designing furniture, you have to work from the inside to the outside. So I think using the interior space, and quite frequently, the interior spaces I had were just dumb cubicles, they were matchboxes. So you had to reorient the room differently than the box was conceived. And there was a beautiful view in one area, or fireplace someplace else, and then you got entertainment elements such as television and so on. So you really had to refocus the interior. And so I conceived the idea of interior landscaping to use the cubicle that contains the room just as a boundary, and then work on the inside of the space to create the living quarters.
Oh, well said. And you pointed to something that leads to my next question, thank you very much, about your love of trees and nature, and clearly in both of your work, long connection to nature. So, Chris, I want to start with you and ask, what lessons perhaps does nature teach you, or how does it inform your work?
It's pretty obvious, influential, but especially now that I live in the country full time, it's like being around just a brilliant designer who's been doing it for a few million years. And so I think the key for me is not to try and outdo what's already so much better than anything you can do yourself, but try and just accent it and work with it without insulting it.
And in some of your work, you allow nature to take its course. I mean, a piece comes out, and as you said, you have to watch and wait and see what happens.
Right, and I love that about it. It just, you can try and control it, but you never really can. And that unpredictable aspect of pieces, especially in the pedestals and the vessels, something I really like. And it's a fine line, though, of knowing where to stop. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But there are a lot of people, out there that I admire who understand that fine line, like Andy Goldsworthy or Noguchi, and
And Tim Hawkinson.
Tim Hawkinson. He's more, I consider him an urban Andy Goldsworthy.
And Vladimir, what do you think you've learned from nature, or how have you taken from it?
Well, I've taken nature as a professor for me, and things have growing patterns. Things are rooted into the ground, but unlike Chris, I manipulate it and get my lessons from nature. The joinery, whether it is a tree or whether it is an animal, whether it is a young horse, a filly or something like that. A young horse stands with its legs spread apart for stability, and they have the most elegantly thin legs and yet support a hefty body. And so I try to interpret those things that I see in nature and redesign and use it in my design work. But I admire the way Chris uses the raw material and leaves it as a raw material. I have to manipulate it into something else.
In terms of structure and
well,
form,
like
yes.
my original rocking chairs, where I took the knuckle joints of either from the human form or from an animal form or from the way a tree grows out, from its stem coming out thick and then coming out very tenuous thin lines because it doesn't need to support weight.
Or the chaise, for example, with the 3 legs to 4 and the way they sort of sprout
and
from the base.
They become combination of sculpture and nature.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And along those lines, there's a word that is often used to describe both of your work, and the word is organic. And I'm fascinated with this sort of notion of what organic design really means today. And Chris, I'd like to start with you and say, how do you define organic? What does that mean to you?
I'm not really sure. I mean, I think sometimes it's referred to parts of my furniture, an organic edge of a table, but I'm not sure that's the way it's used most often in contemporary design. I think that's to describe more shapes that are not straight-lined and amorphic, curvy, styles of furniture, which is something I'm conscious of when I design, and I love the minimal school of design, but it does at a certain point I feel uncomfortable with it. I feel it's very rigid. The Rietveld and Donald Judd and a lot of that, the Mies van der Rohe interiors. I mean, there's something pure and beautiful about it. But for me, the curves, are important. It just adds an element, a softness that I think is important in my design anyway.
Great. And Vladimir? What does organic mean to you?
Well, organic, I looked it up on my computer before I came here. And I think it says from nature. Organic is something that comes from nature. And I think that basically identifies where my inspiration comes from. I think of I use the human form as the most organic element that we have to work with. And I try to use positive, negative shapes to complement the human form. The spinal cord of a human being is what we have to reflect in the seat. And the height from the floor to our knees is I guess it's called ergonomics nowadays. Right. But before it was ergonomics, it was still organic. And so to me, the organic shapes are things that are influenced, inspired by nature.
Perhaps it's just a word that journalists are abusing now to mean many different things, which I think is partly true, because I myself find the tendency to use that word in dealing with simply shape, one thing without the other. So
look at my note if I wrote it down. I don't know.
Your definition.
Let me see if I wrote down the words. No, the only thing I wrote down was organic is natural, and amorphous is formless, unstructured, fluid, or vague. Well, fluid is the one that I like best for amorphous, because I think, again, it's a flowing concept. My research for you.
Thank you very much. To another side of the spectrum, there also seems to be a current of Japanese influence. And I wanted to find out from you, Chris, what proponents of Japanese design have inspired your work. What examples might you use?
Well, it is just an immediate attraction the whole Japanese aesthetic, this simplicity and how well crafted and thought out the design is. I think the main influence for me is the way Japanese design works together. Whether it's the garden or the house or the interior, it's all part of the same concept and idea that nothing overshadows anything else. There's something very humble, and especially coming out of a Western sense of design, where there's a more arrogant sense of just designing something because one has to design it. It doesn't matter whether it looks good with something else or if it goes with anything else, as long as it works on a piece of paper or in in a silhouette shot. It's irrelevant whether it fits with anything else. And that part I really like about the whole culture and the aesthetic. But then there's just very specific influences. Or there's a line of lanterns that I designed for Pucci last year that were all based on Japanese candle boxes, and those are things that I've
with a handle on top that you could lift.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Their floor.
Yeah, and that was a direct influence.
That's a great example. And Vladimir, what about you?
Well, to me, Japanese design was really the distillation of a line and the perfection of a line. And I think my strongest influence was in the 70s when I designed the cubistic shapes, the cubistic sofa, the chair that is being used by Armani in Nobu. Very linear things. And I looked at the soji as being the epitome of Japanese refinement. And I try to reproduce that in some of my furniture pieces. And of course I love Japanese things, especially sushi.
The two of you have vastly different experience with production. We've touched on that a little bit, but I just wanted to highlight the notion of designing for private client and commission versus designing for mass production, large-scale production with companies. Chris, if you could answer, what to the idea of designing for private commissions. What that.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked pretty much the same way for 15 years now, and I feel very comfortable in that way and with that hat. I mean, I'd like to try the other hat on at some point. It's I've seen other designers. Nakashima did a couple of lines, I think, maybe for Knoll. That they're not the ones you remember him for, but I think he had some fun. But that's something as a designer, I'd like to try other things. But I'm very comfortable working this way for the rest of my life as well.
And it's interesting too, because I think, Vladimir, you mentioned when you are one difference might be when you're designing for a large production, it's more like designing for a vacuum, as you said. You don't have the constraints or requirements that maybe a private client would furnish you or demand of you.
Different restraints. It's very. I learned an awful lot when I went south. South meaning going to High Point.
Oh, okay.
I always considered myself.
What that meant.
Always considered myself to be a couture designer in New York, and I disdained the idea of working in mass production. And so for a good 45 years or 50 years almost, I prided myself in doing very custom, very quality-oriented things. When I started to work with manufacturers, I learned an awful lot of lessons, about manufacturing techniques, about materials that are available, and I've broadened my horizon tremendously in working in the commercial marketplace. It's very difficult to come up with, good design does not have to be expensive, but it's more difficult. It's easier to make an expensive piece using gold than using very simple materials. And I have kind of learned to make elegant furniture that can meet the demands of a mass market, that is to say, price. Because if it's a good design and the price is wrong, it won't sell, and it's not a good design. So
it's only good if it gets into somebody's living room.
And exactly. And then the other thing I've learned is, well, that working for a for manufacturers or for a mass market, you've got to stay on top of it. It becomes obsolete. My original designs, the ones I showed you earlier, are 50 years old, and we still make them. But in the commercial marketplace, they're out in 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. You've been recently doing some work, and you have been working with fashion houses. You mentioned Armani and also with Gucci.
Yes.
And now currently working on the design for the lobby of the Standard Hotel in Los Angeles, which is a very hip boutique hotel. And I just wanted to hear from you what that experience is like and how you cast now perhaps a relationship between design, furniture design, and fashion.
Well, I think furniture design has become much more of a fashion item, much more fashion oriented. It's driven, I mean, the fashion industry is driven by rapid obsolescence. In the furniture industry, we can't afford to obsolete a piece of furniture and make you buy a new chair every 6 months. But the ladies are very happy to buy new clothing, new hemlines, new colors. But how it translates for us in furniture design is color plays a very major role now, and there are no holds bound on color. And I've always said, when in doubt, use red. And that goes with anything. But the hotel I'm doing now in in Los Angeles, is going to be fuchsia and purple.
Oh, fabulous.
On black backgrounds in the natural woods.
Wow.
But in working with Tom Ford and Gucci, we were much more interested in the linear effects. We looked at my omnibus concept, and that's the concept that he picked up. And there we are not using color, but all elephant grays, beautiful natural tones. So fashion is a major element and a major influence in the furniture industry. And I think it's what makes it tick and turn around.
I think interesting, too, to consider commercial spaces, both a hotel and perhaps a fashion boutique, especially with your omnibus collection, for example. When you see those pieces arranged, it really changes the way that people are in that space. It's, I would like to say it's very social. Because people engage with each other differently depending on where they're seated. Another example might be your .com piece, and having different levels of seating or different points of view. So in a boutique where you're seeing it from there's different constraints. You're seeing it from all different angles. In a hotel lobby where people are coming and going, and perhaps they're having meetings in the morning, and then as many of these lobbies turn into almost discos at night now.
We have a DJ.
Yeah,
there,
in the lobby.
We have multi-levels, and when I was working with Andre Velez, he said, well, let's put some high purchase for the show-offs. So we have it at 3 different level seating, and as you said, it does function. It has multifunction. In the daytime, it's a business hotel. At night, it becomes a club.
This is the new rage. Everyone seems to be sipping their martinis soon out of your glass for Bombay in hotel lobbies. Well, I want to thank you both and open up the questions from the audience for anyone who has a question for Chris or for Vladimir. Come on, don't be shy. Yes, please.
I wanted to ask about the daybed, because you sort of said, oh, it's just, another daybed, so to speak. You almost dismissed it. And yet it had a new form of sumptuousness, I felt. And am I wrong?
Is this directed towards me? Did I disregard the daybed? No, which? Oh, I guess because I wasn't in that picture. I wasn't focusing on the daybed, but the daybed is a piece that, it's very indicative of the things I've been doing in the last 5 or 6 years, and it's definitely one of the most successful pieces. So it's. Well, thank you. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't put it in my own house if I didn't like it. So it's a piece that, I'm very fond of.
More questions?
We can't see.
We can't see
need a little
anything
more house
anyway.
lights on, a little less light on us, we might see.
Oh, there must be a question up there.
Well,
Ah, there's one, sir. Yes.
Thank you.
This is not so much a question as it is a flashback. And I want to thank Mr. Kagan for instantly eradicating about 45 years of mine. I don't know about his. At that time, or in that period, I think it was 54, 55, I was walking down 57th Street. I was on the north side of the street. I stopped. I looked in the window, and I was immediately. Now, I'm not one who has relationships with furniture. But at that moment, I said, I gotta have this. Now, it was the contour black leather, not a metal base, but sculptured walnut.
yes,
Stupid question, do you remember it?
I sure do. They started off with wooden sculpture bases, and then I went to the metal bases. And then I ran out of a caster, and so I went back to metal or plexiglass.
And I must say it has stood up to all kinds of things, handled very carefully, I might add. At this point, it requires some work. Because
Like we all do.
50 years later.
my wife has been known to say, another few weeks and they'll be ready for the bathroom. If you get it. Now, should it be recovered?
I think unless you want to donate it to a museum, you should recover it. But you should recover it carefully. Because so much of the contour, so much of the design element is, we use the upholstery like sculpture, like soft sculpture. And unless it is carefully done, they will lose the shape. I'll talk to you about it afterwards.
Great. Yes, question.
I was curious about how things come back into fashion. Suddenly, you've done something from the 1950s, and then one person, and maybe it is a great arbiter of taste, a fashion designer or whatever, discovers it, and then everybody wants it. How does that happen?
The press. I think what goes around comes around, and I've been fortunate enough to kick around long enough that I'm back in fashion. But I think we always have we have a historical reference. We like to look somewhat backward, nostalgia. The 50s was a gay and fun time. It was after the war, and more creativity, more fresh creativity came out of that period. And it's had just enough gestation period that now it looks very young and new and exciting for the new generation. X's and Y's and Z's and whatever they all are. And I must say that 50 years ago, the people who loved my furniture couldn't afford it and were young. And 50 years later, they're still young and can't afford it. But because I do mass production now, some things are more affordable. And thankfully, the younger generation has more money than the younger generation 50 years ago had. So that's created a market for that.
Where can one see your new production?
I have a showroom with Dennis Miller in New York. And we have showrooms around the country, a few showrooms in Dallas and in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and so on. And in your little gifty bag is a little brochure that I've put in that shows you some of the pieces that are still in production, because we are still making. I swore when I sold my factory in 1987 I'd get out of this business, and I drifted back into it through the back door. And so I'm still making furniture.
There's also a postcard from Pucci that shows a beautiful photograph of some of Chris's work. And unfortunately, some of the bags have it and some of them don't. So if you have a bag that doesn't have the postcard, please know that you can see Chris's work at the Pucci Gallery on West 18th Street. Any more questions from the audience? Yes, okay, we'll take, sir, yes.
Mr. Kagan, in view of the fact that your work has spanned so many decades and so many stylistic movements, did you ever have the feeling that at some times you operated at the core of the movement and at some times you operated in the fringe or in the leadership of the movement? And do you think that some periods were more successful than others?
Oh yeah, I think I've had dead periods that bored me. I sort of look at my 80s as a sort of a low period of time. I've also found that some of the things that were so far in advance of themselves that they're only coming into their own time now. They weren't successful when I designed them, but looking at them retrospectively now, those are some of the hot items. So I guess I've kind of swam upstream against the trends. I wasn't into production furniture or into molded furniture the way the Eames and Herman Miller and all those pieces were very industrial, advanced pieces. I kind of stuck to the craft concept. My father always said, "Ehre das Handwerk," which means honor the handwork. And my work reflected craftsmanship always. But design-wise, it was pretty far out on the leading edge.
I think we have time for one more question, because I know it's getting late. Yes, in the front.
Very personal one last minute report. Where can we get the Bombay martini glass that you designed?
What is
Where can they get the Bombay martini glass that's being designed?
Ooh, you know something? That they make one only of it for the advertising purposes.
I think you have a customer.
So I hope we'll find a glass manufacturer that will make it, because the designs are really fun.
Perhaps in the Kagan Cafe in
Yeah,
Germany. they
that's
should have
right.
them.
In Freiburg, Germany, we have the Kagan Club, nightclub and cafe, which I designed the interiors for, and I get free drinks when I go to Freiburg.
But thank you very much all for coming, and thank you to Chris Lehrecke and Vladimir Kagan.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.